Hey everybody, ronarray here, and in this video I want to go over most of the strategies that you can use to farm tier 17 maps. How you can drop the biggest amount of maps, what could be strategies with lower cost, what should be more expensive strategies, and how you can utilize them to drop as many maps as possible. You also will be able to utilize this map by selling them or running them yourselves. Let's go! So first important part that I can talk about is singular focus. After a lot of tests, we can certainly confirm that singular focus is lowering the amount of tier 17 maps that can drop. Because every map that can drop can be transformed to tier 17 if it's already at tier 16. That way, when we are lowering it with singular focus, some maps cannot be dropped and will be just transitioned into currency. That way, if they're transitioned into currency, they can be upped to tier 17. If we are taking singular focus, we are essentially lowering the amount of tier 17 that we are going to drop. So I do not recommend to take singular focus for any of tier 17 farming strategies. So talking about maps, we generally have only a few options that working good. For the fortress farming, you will need to focus on dunes or on strength. I personally prefer strength, however a lot of people prefer dunes over it. It's pretty much open map when you can just kill a lot of monsters with AoE attacks. So the dunes and strength are dropping fortress. And fortress is a really good option because it's a pretty expensive tier 17 and it's usually picked for farming. On the other hand, if you're aiming for ziggurat, the tier 17 that is just the best for boss rushing. You can go with other options such as toxic sewer. Toxic sewer is also connected with dunes. So you can pretty much go dunes, toxic sewer in turns. And all of that is a pretty nice strategy. Generally, it's recommended to just pick the map that works for you and try to pick all the favorites that kind of work in for your current strategy. If it's dunes and toxic sewers in turns, you can pick half dunes and half toxic sewers. Or while you're farming toxic sewers, you can pick all dunes, and while you're farming dunes, you can pick all toxic sewers. It will require some changes along the farming lines. However, those are definitely recommended. Farming other maps are not that efficient because mostly you will try to maximize amount of fortresses or ziggurats maps. So the first off, you will need to choose, are you going to farm back to basics maps or are you going to farm normal maps? In normal maps, you will be able to use different mechanics such as strong boxes or shrines to pretty much raise your pack size and maximize amount of drop-in maps. And in back to basics, you will be able to randomly receive additional quantity and pack size based on random numbers. Those approaches are pretty different and I'm going to go over two atlases for both of them. So comparing back to basics against the normal setup, it's hard to say which is more profitable. Back to basics is pretty random and could lead on higher drops at times and less drops on other times. The normal setup can provide better pack size and additional loot as well because it can give you some kind of mechanics in the maps themselves. The normal setup also gives you an approach to altars. And altars can pretty much help you heavily, especially giving you additional chance to duplicate your maps, which is pretty important. So I overall prefer normal setup against back to basics, mostly due to altars. So the first tree is pretty much back to basics. It's based around back to basics passive, which will take all extra content out of the maps, but it will provide from 0 to 80% of more explicit modifier effect. It stacks the pack size pretty well. In that version of the tree, you don't need to take anything else except additional explicit modifier bonuses, Scarabs, and map tiers. So nothing else is required with that setup. You also can get Conquerors for chance to drop a Conqueror map, Remnants of the Past for Elder Guardian and Shaper Guardian map, and Vivid Memories for Synthesis maps. Those are not really that important because those maps are not really cost a lot right now. However, they could be more important at the start of the next league. You can also take Eternal Torment going to the left for additional chances for Embers of Flame. To the left, you can take Devout Pursuit and Imperial Wraith. Both of them are pretty nice, however are definitely not necessary. The most important part is just taking all explicit modifiers and some chances for Scarabs. Quantity of items on top can help as well, because more quantity can provide more maps too. So again, that in normal tree, you will be able to receive additional ways to stack your pack size. You will be able to get drawn to power for additional monsters on your shrines. You can get one shrine from supplication and one more shrine as a bonus from domination shrine chance from passives here and here. It can lead to 2 shrines in a map without anything on top of it. You can also get the altars, and I really recommend going for blue, because blue can provide you the bonus that will duplicate your maps, which is a huge upside. I'm taking both Rampant Growth, Eldritch Gaze, and the Shadow Hunger. You can also use the Storm Boxes, so most of the time I'm just using Twice Tempted, and I'm taking all bonuses for additional packs of monsters here. I'm also banning all the mechanics except Breaches and Delirium, because Breaches and Delirium can pretty much raise the pack size in the map and can help us to farm better. Everything else is not that important and not really providing a lot of value, so I prefer to block it, because it will raise our chances to receive more shrines, more Stormboxes, or Breach and Delirium, which will be good. Those trees are pretty much kinda similar, however you will need to choose at least one that you are going to use, so back to basics or normal one. I also think that a quick tier list for Scarabs is a good thing to do. I think the most important Scarabs is Hornet Scarab for Pandemonium, because it can give you a lot of bosses, and bosses have higher chances to drop the maps, and they can also give you a guaranteed maps as well. On top of that, Cartography Scarab of Singularity stacked with Pandemonium is a great thing, and if you're not really riding back to basics, Domination Scarab of Terrors is definitely S tier. For A tier, I would pick Cartography Scarab of Duplication because, well, it's a pretty good scarab. You will use it in almost all strategies. And for lower tier, I think both Cartography Scarab and Cartography Scarab of Ascension should be there, because both of them can give you more chances to drop more maps in general. And the last but not the least should be Cartography Scarab of Corruption, because that one is needed only when you try to get more maps for yourself to run. So talking about how to set up your maps, there are a few strategies going from more expensive ones to less expensive ones, and I want to start with a basic one which is pretty simple and could be done for everyone, even on a budget. So first setup is the most common one and is very basic. You're just using Cartography Scarab, a Cartography Scarab of Duplication, and another one, so all of them together. That way you're getting a lot of chances to duplicate your maps. You're also raising amount of maps as well. This is the most basic setup that you can use and could be considered low investment, because all of those scarabs not really costing a lot of currency. Duplication should be one divine for about 30 or something like that, and Cartography Scarab has a very low price as well. On top of that, I recommend to use Domination Crab device, because that way we can get additional shrines, 3 additional shrines, and all additional shrines are going to provide additional monsters as well. You can also use another craft, so instead of that you can use Ambush for 5 additional storm boxes, but I don't really recommend it because it has higher cost. Overall, if you feel like it, you can try Ambush, however most of the time going for Domination can save you a few chaoses. If you're sure about it, you can go for Ambush instead. On top of that, you will need a map with at least 100 quantity. I recommend 8 mod ones, because that way you'll get higher pack size. So just the basic scarabs and just the duplications. If you're using back to basics, you will be unable to use Eater of Worlds and Ambush. That way you'll just go quantity and no peak there. So if you're going back to basics, don't use it, and if you're not really going back to basics, you can use Eater and Ambush with same setup. The setup itself is working both for back to basics and normal tree, so just run it with anything that you like. Another lower investment option is pretty much using double cartography scarab of duplication, but instead of using double normal cartography scarabs, you could use one cartography scarab of Ascension. That way your maps found in your area will be one tier higher, pretty much leading your 15s to convert to 16s, and that way 16s will have a chance to convert to 17s. It should rise the amount of tier 17s that you're dropping, at least in my experience. It's not really completely confirmed for now, but it could be a decent option for some approach like that as well. You can also run it with back to basics, so just use quantity and drop it over worlds, or if you're using normal tree, get it back and pretty much use domination or ambush. So this setup here is more expensive one. That way you can get cartography scarab of singularity for unique maps that will drop from final map boss. Unique maps can be converted to tier 17, and that way if you're getting that scarab you can get more tier 17 drops. On top of that you're using Horned Scarab of Pandemonium. Horned Scarab of Pandemonium will give you a lot of additional Atlas bosses in the map. Together with Scarab of Singularity is going to give you much more maps. In the same way, and that way, much more tier 17s. You are still using duplication scarabs because both of them are providing a pretty decent result, and duplication is a very important mechanic. So it also goes the same fashion, either on ambush or either on domination if you're not really using back to basics, and if you're using back to basics just quantity and nothing here. So this is another option that you can run only with normal Atlas, because with not a normal Atlas you will be unable to profit from it. If you're running back to basics, please ignore that part because that strategy is not working without normal tree. For normal tree you're going to use Domination Scarab of Terrors. It's going to give you at least one Atlas boss provided by the Scarab itself. You will need to use Domination and you will also need to receive shrines. So 3 shrines from Domination, 2 from your 3, that's about 5 shrines in the sum. That way you will receive at least 5 additional bosses. On top of that, all of them will give you unique maps with Cartography Scarab of Singularity, and Domination Scarab of Terrors is pretty much just taking the place of Horned Scarab of Pandemonium. I think that strategy should be less profit efficient, because right now Domination Scarab of Terrors cost more than Pandemonium. However, if the prices will change, it could be a pretty decent option. The map itself stays the same, so nothing changed in that regard. So this is probably the most expensive set that you can use. And that way you're using both expensive scarabs, so Horned Scarab of Pandemonium together with Domination Scarab of Terrors. You are still using Domination for additional shrines, and that way you will receive much more bosses, because you're using both Pandemonium and Scarab of Terrors. However, that approach will be very expensive, and in my opinion not that profitable. But if you will need to drop as many tier 17s as possible on one map, that's probably the best strategy that can lead you to that. So talking about how many maps you should expect. Here is a quick example of me running that strategy, and as you can see I got 2 tier 17 maps in that setup. However, it could be kinda random. On average, you should expect at least 1, maybe 1.5, or a little less than 1 tier 17 map per your map that you will run. Perfectly, you need to run at least sample of 100 map to confirm it. Sometimes you could drop 2, sometimes you can drop even 3, but most of the time you will average something around 1, and that's pretty much a really good number. 1.5 is almost perfect at that point, and reaching for 2 is possible only with the most expensive approach. So talking about which strategy is more profitable. Generally, I really prefer Horned Scarab of Pandemonium strategy with normal Atlas without back to basics. I think it just gives better results, at least for me, and based on my experience. However, after a lot of changes, I would say Cartography Scarab low investment strategy with just duplication and cartographers are pretty much a huge runner-up in my opinion as well, because that way you can just run the maps pretty fast without looking at any part of the cost. Any of them will definitely work for you, and thank you very much for watching the video. Feel free to subscribe for the channel for more RPG content too, and go get the maps!